Chapter 2 Control and Coordination, video number 3. Students, today in this video I'll be discussing about the functions of nervous system, and then I'll be telling you about the parts of human nervous system, under which you'll be learning about the central nervous system, which comprises of brain and spinal cord. You'll be learning about the peripheral nervous system, and then I'll discuss about that how the central nervous system is protected in our body. And at the end, I'll be discussing about how the nervous tissue or the nervous system cause any kind of action. The nervous system comprises of a system of neurons, nerves and nervous organs which controls and coordinates various activities through electrical impulses or nerve impulses. Before discussing about the human nervous system, let me first tell you about the important functions performed by the nervous system. The nervous system controls the functioning of different tissues, organs and parts of the body. It coordinates the activity of different but interrelated organs so as to perform a particular function. For example, for performing nutrition, we have a digestive system which comprises of mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine with associated digestive glands. So all these different but interrelated organs work in an orderly manner. And how do they work? That is already discussed in my previous videos. So this orderly manner, they work in an orderly manner or in a coordinated manner, and that's because of the nervous system. Right. Now, next important function of the nervous system is it makes the organisms or the animals aware of the surrounding with the help of sense organs. So we come to know what is happening all around us. It's because of the receptors. You have already learned that how receptors first receive the stimulus, and then this message is then conveyed in the form of electrical impulse to the brain where analysis occurs, right? So in this way the nervous system helps us to know or be aware of the happenings or whatever is happening in our surrounding. Next important function is that the higher mental activities like intelligence, reasoning, emotions, memory are all due to the nervous system. And the nervous system also performs certain activities without consulting our will. Those activities are done without making us aware of they are happening. Like for example, your breathing at present, your heart is beating. All these are involuntary, and the food that you might have eaten is being passed down through the alimentary canal through peristalsis. These are all examples of involuntary movements, and they are carried out by a section of nervous system without consulting the will. Discussing about the human nervous system in detail, let us first see this flow chart which shows you the parts of the human nervous system. The human nervous system comprises of central nervous system, also called as the CNS, which runs mid-dorsally, and the lateral nervous system, which is made up of nerves that makes your peripheral nervous system or PNS. The central nervous system comprises of brain and the spinal cord. The brain is the highest coordinating center of the body, whereas the spinal cord extends from the base of the brain. So if this is the brain, from the base of the brain arises the spinal cord. It's a long tube, and the role of the spinal cord is to conduct the sensory and motor impulses to and from the brain. So the messages from different parts of the body through the nerves, those nerves are actually a part of the peripheral nervous system. So all these sensory information is taken to the brain via the spinal cord. Interpretation of message occurs in the brain, and a decision is taken. That decision through motor neurons in the form of motor impulses is taken again to the effector organ by via the spinal cord. So that's these two, that is the brain and the spinal cord, makes your central nervous system. The peripheral nervous system comprises of nerves, and these nerves develop from the CNS or the central nervous system, and the function of this peripheral nervous system is to connect different parts of the body to the central nervous system. The PNS or the peripheral nervous system comprises of voluntary nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The voluntary nervous system is that part of the nervous system which regulates the activities of external organs whose movement or action is under our control, that those organs which perform activities by consulting our will. Whereas your autonomic nervous system, it is that part of the nervous system which regulates and coordinates the activities of internal organs without consulting our will. Now, the voluntary nervous system or the peripheral nervous system is made up of nerves which are connected to your central nervous system. So, these nerves are of two types. Those nerves that arise from the spinal cord are called as spinal nerves, and those nerves that arise from the brain are called as cranial nerves. So, the diagram that you see here, this diagram shows the parts of the nervous system, that is the central nervous system made up of brain and the spinal cord which runs mid-dorsally, and as you can see, the different parts of the body is connected to the spinal cord or the brain by means of these yellow lines that you see, which makes the peripheral nervous system. Your brain is the highest coordinating center of the body which coordinates or which actually integrates all the information that is brought from different parts of the body, and any kind of decision which will be an action taken by the organism, the decision or response is generated in the brain, right? Whereas a spinal cord is a long tubular bundle of neurons which runs along or through this vertebral column. Okay, and we can say that this spinal cord is actually the connecting link between the different parts of the body and the brain. So it carries the information, sensory information from different parts of the body is first brought to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord it is taken to the brain. After taking a decision, this is done, the decision is taken in the brain through interpretation and analysis. So after that, once a response is generated, that response will be taken first to the spinal cord, and then it will be taken through the motor neurons to different parts of the body, right? So that's about the central nervous system, and as already discussed, the peripheral nervous system is a lateral part of the nervous system. You can see here there are nerves arising. Okay, so these nerves, some of the nerves arise from the brain which are called as cranial nerves, some nerves arise from the spinal cord, and these nerves that you see arising from the spinal cords, they are called as the spinal nerves. Okay, and the function of this peripheral nervous system, that is spinal nerves and cranial nerves, that makes a peripheral nervous system. So the function of peripheral nervous system is to connect the different parts of the body to the central nervous system. As just now told you, human brain is a part of central nervous system, and the brain is the highest coordinating center of the body. So now let us learn about the structure of brain, and before we discuss about the functions performed, first through a flow chart let us know about what are the different components of brain. Your brain is divided into three parts. They are the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. The largest part of the brain is the forebrain, which is further subdivided into, that is, the forebrain comprises of olfactory lobes, which are two in number, cerebrum, that's further divided into two halves called as the cerebral hemispheres, and the diencephalon. For class 10, you have to learn about the functions of cerebrum and the hypothalamus. The rest is not there for class 10 syllabus according to CBSE, right? So these three, that is the olfactory lobes, cerebrum, and the diencephalon, makes the forebrain. To get an extra knowledge, let us know a bit about the olfactory lobes. The olfactory lobes, their role is to relay the sense of smell. The sense of smell is received by the olfactory receptors which are present in your nasal cavity, in the nasal epithelium. So when you smell something, the olfactory receptors receive the sense of smell, and then they convert it into an electrical impulse. This electrical impulse through a sensory neuron is brought to the olfactory lobe, and then the olfactory lobe will relay it to a part of cerebrum which is called as a temporal part of the cerebrum, there it is taken where analysis of the message will be done, right? So that's a function of olfactory lobe. Cerebrum, it is the largest part of the brain which is divided into two cerebral hemispheres, about which I'll be telling you in detail. And then diencephalon, it comprises of three parts, that is epithalamus, thalamus and the hypothalamus, right? So these three makes the forebrain. Then the next part of the brain is the midbrain, okay, which is a center for audio visual reflex actions, right? And then finally the hindbrain, which is the second largest part of the brain. The hindbrain is the second largest part of the brain, which comprises of pons, cerebellum and medulla. Forebrain is the main thinking part of the brain, and the forebrain consists of cerebrum, the olfactory lobes which are present somewhere over here, then the diencephalon, under which you have to learn only about the hypothalamus. First let us learn about the cerebrum. Cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. The cerebrum makes around 80% of the brain. So the front part of the brain, the lateral side and the superior part of the brain is all cerebrum. Okay, it is occupied by the cerebrum, right? Now the cerebrum has two halves. It is divided into two halves, and these two halves are held at a particular point which is visible in the form of a longitudinal fissure. So each half of the cerebrum is called as cerebral hemisphere. So you've got the right and the left cerebral hemisphere, and these two cerebral hemispheres are held together by means of a thick band of nerve fiber which is called as corpus callosum. This thick band of nerve fiber that you see, this holds the two cerebral hemisphere, and this thick band of nerve fiber is called as corpus callosum. Okay. Now the cerebrum is divided into two layers. Like if it is cut and seen, you have got the outer cerebral cortex, which is actually visible over here, and the inner cerebral medulla, right? So what is actually visible, as you can see in this diagram, is actually the outer layer of cerebrum, which is called as a cerebral cortex. That's highly folded. You can see there are lots of elevations and depressions. So these foldings of the cerebral cortex increases the total surface area for various mental activities, right? Now, so here you find that the cerebral, all those activities, the coordinating centers for various activities, they are all located in the cerebral cortex. Now, the cerebral cortex, in your book it is mentioned as a forebrain, has many coordinating centers. Each coordinating center will be having three regions. One is the sensory area. You've got the sensory area, you've got the motor areas and the association center. So you find there are lots of coordinating centers, and these coordinating centers, they are made up of the sensory area, there is association area, and you've got the motor areas. Now the sensory area is that part of the coordinating center which is going to receive sensory information. That is, once the stimulus is received by the receptors, say a stimulus of touch or a stimulus of a pressure, so these stimulus or the taste, the stimulus that is received by the receptors will first be taken to the sensory area, right? From the sensory area, this information will be passed on to the association centers or the association areas, where the interpretation of message is done. This interpretation of the message will be done on the basis of information that has been brought, on the basis of sensory information that is brought from all the other parts of the body, and the information that is already stored in the brain as memory. So based on all these things, In the association center, the analysis is done and a response is generated. That response then will be passed to the motor area, and from this motor area, the response, once it is passed to the motor area will be having the neurons, the motor neurons. The dendrite tips of the motor neurons will pick up the response, the message of response, and then they will be then taking it to the effector organs. So the forebrain or the cerebral cortex has sensory areas, the association centers, and the motor areas. Here just have a look at the description. The sensory areas receive sensory information, right? It receives the sensory information from various receptors. The association areas, they are the regions where sensory information is interpreted by putting it together with the information brought from other receptors and the information that is already stored in the brain, which is your memory, and based on all these things, a decision, which is response, is made. This information is then passed to the motor area, which then sends the information to the effector organ by means of the motor neuron. Important functions performed by the cerebrum, which is a part of the forebrain. The cerebrum is the center for intelligence, lying in the front part of the forebrain, or the cerebrum is the center for intelligence. The cerebrum also has got control centers for various kinds of movements, both voluntary as well as involuntary, like the movement of facial muscles, chewing, all these movements of the movement of your lips, these are all controlled by the centers present in the forebrain. The forebrain or the cerebrum, it also has got center for taste. Okay, so the center for taste, the information about those taste is first taken by the receptors. You had learned about the gustatory receptors, so they receive the sensation, that is, they receive the stimulus of taste, take it to the forebrain, take it to the cerebrum, where the analysis of the same is done, and you come to know what kind of taste it is. So this center for taste is located in the cerebrum. The cerebrum also has got centers for various sensations like touch, pain, pressure, etc. The sensation of light or vision is also located. The perception of sight is also located in the cerebrum. Okay, so these are the important functions, and apart from that, also the cerebrum has got the center for audio visual memory, and also it has the center for hearing. So the control center for hearing and smell is also located in the cerebrum. The important part of the forebrain is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus has got control centers for hunger, for fullness, the feeling of fullness that one gets after having food, the center for thirst, body temperature, fatigueness, then you've got the center for sleep and emotions. All these centers are located in the hypothalamus, right? One more important function of hypothalamus is that the hypothalamus is the connecting link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. And how it forms a connecting link is that the hypothalamus secretes releasing hormones. Various kinds of releasing hormones are secreted by hypothalamus, and these releasing hormones, they stimulate the pituitary gland, which is the master gland of the endocrine system. So they stimulate the pituitary gland to release its hormone. Because of this, the hypothalamus is said to be as a connecting link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. The midbrain is not visible from top because it is totally covered or overlapped by the cerebrum. The important function of the midbrain is that it is a center for audio visual reflex actions. reflex actions of head, neck and trunk in response to the stimuli of sight or sound is connected to the midbrain. The center of it will be the midbrain, right? Even the increase or decrease in the size of the pupil, the center for this or the control center of it is the midbrain. The third part of the brain is the hindbrain. The hindbrain consists of pons, medulla and cerebellum. Now the pons acts like a relay center whose role is to relay various sensory information to different parts of the brain. Next important part is the medulla. The medulla has got various kinds of control centers, like it has got the respiratory center for controlling the rate of breathing. Second, it has the cardiac center for controlling the rate of heartbeat. Apart from this, the medulla also has got reflex centers for actions like swallowing, vomiting, coughing, sneezing, salivation, peristalsis. So these all centers are located in the medulla. And other thing that you see is it is a medulla which is connected to the spinal cord, the next part of the central nervous system. Now the midbrain, pons and medulla together makes the brain stem. So your brain stem is formed of the midbrain, the pons and the medulla. The third important part of the hindbrain is the cerebellum. Cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain. And like the cerebellum is also divided into two cerebellar hemispheres. The cerebellum coordinates muscular activities. It is the center which controls or which maintains the equilibrium and posture of our body. That is the posture that is to be maintained while walking, while riding a bicycle, jumping, lifting a pen. When you lift a pen, you have to bend, but when you bend, you don't fall. That's all because it's controlled by the cerebellum. So the main function of cerebellum is to maintain the equilibrium, posture or balance of the body. Okay, so these are the important functions that are performed by the brain. Okay, so here we have got this table. It shows the important functions performed by the brain. Here, as you can see, cerebellum is the main thinking part of the brain. It has the center for intelligence and the center for various voluntary actions. The cerebellum has got the center for smell, sight, touch, all these vision. These centers are located in the cerebellum. And the diencephalon, you have learned it as a part of diencephalon. You have learned about the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus is the center for hunger, thirst, for body temperature, sleep, feeling of fullness. So all these centers are located in the diencephalon, right? Now midbrain, it controls the reflex movements of the neck, head and the trunk in response to visual and auditory stimulus. Visual, that is light, and auditory, that is sound. And it also controls the reflex movements of the eye muscles, that is a change in the size of the pupil or the shape of the eyelids. The center of this is located in the midbrain. Your hindbrain has got three parts, that is the pons, the cerebellum and the medulla. The pons acts like a relay center for sending various kind of sensory informations to different parts of the brain. The cerebellum's main function is to maintain the posture or balance of the body, and it also enables us to make proper voluntary movements, okay, precise voluntary movements. Then Another part of the hindbrain is medulla, which is a center for involuntary actions like breathing, the heartbeat. It is a center for reflexes like coughing, sneezing, swallowing, vomiting. So all these centers are located in the medulla part of the brain. Let's now differentiate between cerebellum and cerebrum. Cerebrum, as already told to you, is a part of the forebrain, whereas cerebellum is a part of hindbrain. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, whereas cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain. 80% of the brain is cerebrum, whereas cerebellum forms around 12.5% of the brain. The cerebrum is a seat of intelligence and muscular activities, whereas the cerebellum coordinates various muscular activities. Right? Next important difference is that the cerebrum controls intelligence, movements, speech, sight, taste, hearing, and other sensation, whereas the cerebellum helps in maintaining the equilibrium or posture of the body. The cerebrum is a center for both voluntary and involuntary actions, whereas the cerebellum enables us to make precise and accurate voluntary action. Difference between the forebrain and the hindbrain. The forebrain is located in the forwardmost portion of the brain, whereas the hindbrain is located in the lower back part of the brain. The forebrain consists of olfactory lobes, cerebrum, and diencephalon, whereas the hindbrain comprises of pons, medulla, and cerebellum. The forebrain is responsible for complex activities like intelligence, memory, regulation of body temperature, thirst, hunger, etc. Whereas the hindbrain is responsible for regulating the visceral function, that is functioning of internal organs that includes heartbeat, respiration, blood pressure. It also helps in making precise voluntary actions and is also responsible for maintenance of body posture or equilibrium. The next important part of the central nervous system is the spinal cord. The spinal cord is a narrow cylindrical lower part of the central nervous system which arises from the base of the brain. Just now I had told you that the medulla, which is a part of hindbrain, is connected to the spinal cord. Spinal cord has got two important functions to perform. The first important function of spinal cord is that it is the center for many reflex actions, like that was discussed to you in my previous video. An example of it is a sudden withdrawal of hand when you touch a hot plate. So the center for such an action is the spinal cord. The next important function of the spinal cord is that it conducts the sensory and motor impulses to and from the brain. As you can see in this diagram, there are nerves, which is a part of peripheral nervous system. So the spinal nerves that you can see here, they will be carrying the sensory information to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord the sensory information is taken to the brain for interpretation and analysis. And once the same is done, that is interpretation is done, the response that is generated will again be taken to the spinal cord, and from there through the motor neurons which are present, they are then taken to the effector organ. So now let us study about how is the central nervous system protected. You know that the central nervous system comprises of delicate organs like brain and spinal cord, and these organs need to be quite well protected. Now brain is protected by a bony box which is called as cranium, right? Here, as you all know, that brain is located in the skull, so this particular part of the skull, the cranium, is the one, it's a bony covering that protects the brain from mechanical shocks and injuries. Apart from this, the brain is covered with coverings which are called as meninges, and between the meninges a fluid flows which is called as cerebrospinal fluid. Right? In your book, if you refer, you'll find it is mentioned that the brain is contained in a fluid filled balloon which provides protection from mechanical shocks and injuries, right? So here, as you can see here, it is the cranium. So it is the cranium which protects the brain. It is a bony covering that protects the brain. And the second way it is protected is the three layers. There are three layers that covers the brain. Okay, these three layers are called as a meninges. So they cover the brain and they also provide protection to the brain. And apart from that, between the meninges there flows a fluid called a cerebrospinal fluid, okay, which protects the brain from mechanical shocks and injuries. And hence it is mentioned in your book, because these terms are not given in your NCERT. It's mentioned that the brain is present in a fluid filled balloon. Fluid means the cerebrospinal fluid and balloon stands for the meninges, right? Similarly, spinal cord is also protected by these three things. First thing is the vertebral column or the backbone, that is a bony covering of the spinal cord. Spinal cord runs through this vertebral column. So this provides protection from mechanical shocks and injuries. Other thing is that the spinal cord is also covered by meninges. Okay, so these meninges forms the coverings both of brain as well as spinal cord. And the third is the cerebrospinal fluid. That's a fluid that protects both brain and the spinal cord from mechanical shocks and injuries. So in this way, the central nervous system is quite well protected. So in this video, I had discussed about how the different parts of the brain as well as the spinal cord controls various actions. Now, the nervous system is meant for providing coordinated actions. For any coordinated action, there are some important components that are required. First thing that is required is a receptor, right? Second thing that is required is a sensory neuron, because the receptors will receive the stimulus, then the stimulus will be taken by the neuron. The stimulus will be then taken by the sensory neuron to the central nervous system. So your spinal cord and the brain, they serve as a central nervous system, which is the next part of, or the component of a coordinated action. Now in the brain, once the message reaches the brain, in the brain this message which has been brought, the sensory information that has been brought, will be analyzed, will be interpreted, and based on the information that is already stored in the brain and the information that is brought from different parts of the body, a response is generated. This response that is generated will now be taken from the brain by the motor neuron to the effector organ, right? Now, so here the important components of any coordinated action is, first is a receptor, then you have sensory neuron, next comes the central nervous system where interpretation and analysis is done, then you've got the motor neuron which will be taking the response to the effector organ, and the effector organ will be a muscle or a gland. Now muscle shows the response in the form of movement. Now this movement is brought by the contraction of muscle. So now let us study how this happens. You might have learned in your class 9 that the muscle fiber, here in this diagram there is one muscle fiber shown over here. So the muscle fiber has special proteins which are called as contractile proteins, right? So these contractile proteins will help in movement. And how does this happen? Just try to recall about the neuromuscular junction, that when the electrical impulse reaches the muscle fiber, then from the synaptic knobs of the motor neurons, the chemicals will be released, and these chemicals or the neurotransmitters binds to the receptors which are present in the muscles. So when the receptors bind, what happens is the muscle fiber will get excited, and due to which those contractile proteins, There are two types of contractile proteins present in the muscle fiber, that's actin and myosin, about which you'll be learning in your higher classes. So these contractile proteins which are present in the cytoplasm of the muscle fiber, they change their shape and arrangement. And when this happens, that is when they change their shape and arrangement, the muscle fiber becomes shorter and the action is shown in the form of movement. So here in case of animals, most of the actions that are shown, they are in the form of movements, and those movements are because of contraction and relaxation of the muscles which are the effector organ. So in this way, the neural system or the nervous system controls and coordinates various activities. But when we take plants as an example, plants are also living organisms, but plants do not have any nervous system. But then, despite of that also, the plants also show movements, which are of two types. The movements in plants are of two types. They are growth dependent movements and growth independent movements, and those movements are also done in a controlled and coordinated manner. But those movements are not because of muscular contraction, because plants do not have neuromuscular system. That's because of certain other reasons about which I'll be telling you in my next video. Right? Now, on the basis of the video that you have seen, here are some questions that you have to answer, and this answer you have to write in your bio assignment copies. The first question is, what is peripheral system composed of? Differentiate between cerebrum and cerebellum. Write down the difference between forebrain and hindbrain. Name the parts of the hindbrain and write their functions. List down the functions of forebrain. What are the functions of spinal cord and how is the central nervous system protected?